Welcome back to Shaun and Ari Discuss Israel. After a 4-month hiatus, we are back for season 2. Ari, how are you?
I'm good, Shaun. It's good to be back. It's nice to be back here. It's nice to be back in life. And I'm looking forward to another season of interesting and engaging topics.
Right, so let's catch up. Since we left off last time, both of us have been in Miluim, in reserve duty. Ari, what have you been up to?
So I was in reserve duty in the Nitzarim corridor, which the army has now retreated from. We were there for just over 60 days straight. We expanded the security zone within the corridor itself in order to provide more security. We used it to create more of a place from which the army can operate from. After we left, the unit that replaced us, they, as part of the current surrender deal with Hamas, they retreated from it, and basically all of our accomplishments from those 2.5 months, overwhelming, I think 90% of everything we accomplished was basically undone. And other than that, I've gotten back to life, went back to work. And in a few weeks, I'll be traveling to the United States on a speaking tour. I'll be in New York, New Jersey, and Chicago. If anyone's interested, I still have one open slot available on Sunday, March 3rd in New Jersey. If anyone's interested, please reach out. And life is good. No complaints. How about you, Shaun? What have you been up to?
So, like you, I had reserve duty. I had 75 days. I was based in the Shomron, in Samaria, predominantly in and around Shechem, or the Palestinian city of Nablus, where we had a lot of interesting activities and a lot of work to do. In fact, my reserve duty ended officially as the operation ramped up in Jenin, so that a lot of our equipment and a lot of the stuff we found and were able to accomplish in Nablus was used to good effect in Jenin, and the operation is still going on. In between all of that, I actually had 2 trips overseas. I spoke at the Dutch Parliament at their Committee on Foreign Affairs. I spoke about funding from the Netherlands to organizations that were very hostile not only to Israel but also to Dutch policy. And I had a quick conference in Poland. After 75 days of reserve duty, I am now back in normal civilian life, and I am doing my best to reacclimatize to the current situation.
Yeah, we're gonna get to that. How about we just hop right into this subject? We're gonna talk about the surrender deal with Hamas. Let's just get right into it.
All right. Well, I think you gave a bit of a spoiler both in your introduction and now. We are now at the tail end of phase 1. I'm going to call it the hostage deal that came about just before President Trump came into office, which officially said Israel would withdraw from the Nitzarim corridor, allow a whole lot of trucks of aid into Gaza, release thousands of murderers. In return, we would start getting a few of our hostages back. That would be phase 1. Phase 2 would be more hostages and eventually bodies for more terrorists. And then phase 3 would be the rebuilding of Gaza. That is the basics of it right now. As of today, Wednesday, when this podcast comes out, there seems to be a lot of confusion about where we're headed. Will the hostages be released? Right now, we also have the first rockets already being launched from Gaza. And we have the announcement by President Trump that he wants all the hostages released by Saturday at 12 o'clock. So that's the situation. But Ari, it sounds like you have a lot to say about it.
You think? Yeah, I recorded an episode for a different podcast in Hebrew where we discussed a lot about reserve duty, which I'm sure we'll do an episode on that later in the season about the realities of being a civilian soldier and constantly going back and forth. But one of the things we discussed is the hostage deal is great because, I was asked, we saw that military pressure wasn't working. And I countered with, even though I was there for 2 months, there was no significant military pressure. There was no reason to make a deal. We didn't try every other option first. And I think that it would have been the most responsible thing to first use every other option available and only then make what I'm calling a deal with the devil, because Hamas is the embodiment of pure evil in the world today. A lot of Israeli society likes to compare them to Nazis. I don't think they're that smart or efficient or organized. But they are the embodiment of pure evil. And I think any deal you make with them is just justifying their existence to their own people. There's no way that you can communicate with them and it be okay and acceptable. I mean, the head of the Mossad, the head of the Shabak were in Qatar, in Doha, with representatives of this organization, and they weren't set to arrest or murder them. They were there to talk to them. And I think that there's one thing that we're missing here in Israel is the same way in America, where that it's against the law to negotiate with terrorists. If only that was the law here, would force our leadership to live up to the power and the strength that the nation represented in this war, and to the level of which the soldiers rose, especially the reservists. It would have forced our leadership to maybe come close to that level of heroism and exert the power that they actually had and the force that we could have used. I mean, on the one hand, the entire time since the beginning of the war, we've been feeding our enemies. We've been giving them food, water, fuel, medical aid. We've been feeding our enemies on one hand and at the same time fighting them with the other hand. If I did that, if I found a Hamasnik and instead of me as a soldier attacking them, I brought them food, I would go to prison for aiding the enemy during wartime. Yet the standards are different on the national political level, which doesn't make any sense to me.
I'm going to take a step back from that and start from the way I see it. We've said this before. 8 o'clock in the evening on the 7th of October. Prime Minister Netanyahu stood up and he said two things. We're going to get the hostages back and we're going to defeat Hamas. The minute he said those two things, he put us in an unwinnable predicament. Because anything done for one will impact on the other. And we've gotten to the point now where we didn't want to go all out on one because of the other. So we didn't want to really, do everything we could for the hostages because that would impact on the military. And we didn't really want to go all out on the military because that would impact on the hostages. So we kind of chose not doing either. And my frustration is, at the end of the day, we went for this deal with the devil, as you called it, where we're stopping all our military operations. We're withdrawing from all our military gains in Gaza so that we can get hostages back. If that was where the government was going to go, why did hundreds of our friends have to die in battle? If the government was going to capitulate, what were they doing? I feel a personal betrayal on the half of our leadership that didn't have the balls to step up and say, no, we're going to win this militarily.
Well, I think that, first of all, I'm in complete agreement with you on your feelings. I want to say it's a little bit more personal as the person who did the fighting in Gaza itself. And I don't mean that at all as a knock on your service in the Shomron, that it was extraordinarily important that by you being in the Shomron allowed us to do what we did in Gaza. But now it's personal for me. Like, we talk about the Nitzarim corridor. I lived there for 2 months and I provided for its protection. I lost, we didn't talk about it, but one of an officer by us, a team leader by us, who was a legend in his own right in our unit, he was killed fighting there. Again, I can say it now on the air, but the mission that he was leading collected the intelligence that allowed us to recover the body of Oren Shaul, who was killed and his body was captured in Tzuketan in 2014. And it was the day before the current deal went into effect. We were able to retrieve his body based off intelligence that we gathered weeks beforehand that Amit Levy was killed. So it's personal. The feeling of being stabbed in the back almost by our own leadership is very personal for me as well. And I share the same frustrations with you of, if this is where we were going, then why did we just waste all this time to begin with? Why did we spend all of this money? And why did we have to spend all these lives as well of people that were injured and killed in the process? It's silly. Not only that, if you can say, well, we tried militarily and we weren't succeeding, then maybe we can say, okay, we tried, we failed, so now we're going to negotiate. But we didn't try. We were fighting with I would say one hand tied behind our backs, but it was more like 1.5 hands tied behind our backs. We were supporting and feeding our enemies the entire time, and we weren't. The fact that I spent months at home in between rounds of reserve duty meant we weren't doing everything we possibly could on a military level.
Right. I think one of the interesting things I saw on a military level is before Sinwar was killed, he was actually running around Gaza with an Al Jazeera film crew. And Al Jazeera put out this movie of him running around, and you could see that it was in certain areas where the IDF was previously. There was Hebrew writing on the walls. There was food left over by IDF soldiers, which means that Yahya Sinwar, this mass murderer himself, was happy to walk around because he knew there were certain areas where the IDF was, and then they withdrew. It was safe for him to walk around. In fact, he himself was killed almost by accident. He just happened to be in a place where at that time IDF soldiers decided, wait, maybe we should be here too. So the entire operation, I think, was a disaster because our military leadership and our political leadership weren't capable of achieving victory.
I don't think our leadership was capable of making the decision to achieve victory. I mean, I think that achieving victory is not done by leaders. Victory is achieved through the actions of soldiers. We were very capable of achieving victory if we had been allowed to. I think it was more our leadership was afraid of its own shadow, but more so they were afraid of success. They were afraid of succeeding too much. And I think it goes back to this never-ending cycle of fear of a strong Jew and getting out of what I call the ghost, the exile mentality, where you're worried about what the world is going to say. You're worried about how the leadership of the world is going to react to this strong Jew winning a war. Whereas if we only win a little bit, but not too much, we won't be poking the world in the eye, demanding that they react in some way. And it's this fear of just winning, this fear of just being right for once and on the world stage that held them back. I think it froze them from the ability to make that decision to just win.
I agree with your idea, what you call the Jew and the diaspora mentality of always on the back foot. But I don't say it's a fear of winning. And we see this around the world. There's an idea that in order to be right, you need to be a victim. There's a pyramid of victimhood, and only a good victim can win. So as long as we can keep playing the hostage card, we're victims. As long as we can keep talking about October 7th, we're victims. But Palestinian victimhood and Gaza victimhood trumps our victimhood. And there's this idea that you have to constantly play up the victimhood and our own victimhood so you can never win because victims, I'm sorry to say, victims are always on the losing side. Part of the original Zionist ethos is we're no longer going to be victims. We're going to take our destiny into our own hands. And if that means being aggressive, being militarily aggressive, we will do it, we will win, and we're not going to apologize for winning.
Well, Shaun, I can tell you, I think that the nation of Israel is done being a victim. As a nation, I think this war showed when the reserve forces rose to the occasion and the entire civilian society rose to support us, showed that we're done being victims. I think our leadership is not there. And I think that change will only happen once our leaders are replaced here, whether that's in an election in the near future or in a year and a bit from now when they're officially supposed to happen. It's only once we have the ability to replace the leadership will that really change. Because I don't think the people currently holding those positions are capable of making the change that you're saying and that I support. And I think that what we're witnessing right now, we were talking about this right before, that we're witnessing right now in the United States with President Trump and his Doge and Elon Musk is he's done. He's basically said, I'm done with this. We're just going to start doing what's right. We're going to start fixing things and doing things correctly. And he doesn't care. Now, again, he's the leader of the free world. He has a guaranteed 4 years in office. He doesn't have to worry about re-election. Elon Musk is the richest human in the world. He doesn't need anything. Their motivation is actually about as pure as it can get. Whereas there's no person in Israel that we can elect that would have that same position where they're free from the need to be re-elected. They're free of any personal financial constraints, and they can just rule and do things based on purely what's right and wrong with an ideological perspective. I do think, though, that we need to replace the people in those positions in order to start getting closer to that and take full advantage of the potential that exists right now with the friendly administration of the United States.
I agree with everything you're saying. I'm just looking at it slightly differently, and I'll give you an example. Last week, President Trump stood up and said, all the hostages need to be released by Saturday at 12 o'clock. That was an incredible statement. Give us all the hostages now, or there will be hell to pay. This is amazing. It's giving Israel a free hand. And our leadership are backing off like little girls. No, but we only need 3 hostages. What the hell? That's embarrassing.
You just know, after I saw that announcement, I was expecting a phone call saying that we've all been reactivated and that the army's going back on super extreme, like craziest, highest alert possible. Every soldier is being called back to prepare for, that on Saturday at 12:01, a reinvasion and conquering of all of Gaza.
Absolutely. And instead, our leader, I wouldn't even say they blinked. They turned around and walked away.
They yawned. It's not just a blink and like, okay, they opened their eyes back up and now they're on the same page. They were handed an opportunity on a golden platter to actually win. We were handed the opportunity. We didn't take it for ourselves. We didn't create it. Okay, fine. You know what? You weren't smart enough to see it on your own. Trump created it for you. And you walked away. And, we make a joke that the Arabs never miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity. And I was about to say the same thing is true about our leadership, that they will never miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity. There have been so many opportunities during this war that I've seen firsthand that we missed.
Not only missed opportunities, one of my biggest issues right now is the leadership that failed us leading up to the 7th of October, both militarily and politically, is the same leadership that failed on the 7th of October, and it's the same failed leadership that led the war from the 7th of October to the deal a couple of weeks ago. It's the same failed, dismal leadership, both militarily, and I mean this with all due respect to the higher echelons of the army. They've failed us. And the fact that a bunch of them have resigned, I think, is embarrassing, because resigning is not taking responsibility. Many of these people, in my opinion, should be at the very least court-martialed for the death and destruction that was caused by them. And the political leadership have achieved nothing. Nothing at all. They've capitulated and led us to the same situation we were before 7th of October.
So I want to say 2 things. One, I don't think we're in the same situation now as we were before the 7th of October. I'm not the biggest fanboy of the American administration, and I'm very much a Zionist, and not as much as I'm an American citizen. I don't consider myself American. But I'd like to quote Peter Hegseth, the current Secretary of Defense in the U.S., who said it very sharply in his confirmation hearing, where he said, if a rifleman loses his rifle, right? If the regular soldier fails at his most basic foundational responsibility, as a soldier's infantry soldier, you trained from the beginning of basic training. You know exactly where your rifle is at all times, and you know exactly what its status is, whether it's loaded, whether it has a round chambered, the safety's on. You know exactly the status of your weapon and where it is all the time. And if you ever lost your rifle, we were punished so severely and so immediately, it was unbelievable. But when a general fails, he gets promoted. Here in Israel, the chief of staff, his one job is to protect the state of Israel. That is his most important, the foundational role of the chief of military staff, the head of the army. Your job is to protect Israel. You failed. Nothing happened to him. He was resigning. Okay, so resign. He still has a great pension for the rest of his life. He's still respected by society. Why on October 8th was he not arrested and put in prison? The head of military intelligence resigned.
The head of the Shabak is still in his job.
And the head of the Mossad is still in his job. The head of Southern Command resigned. He's still in his job, but he resigned. The head of multiple divisions, the head of my division, who failed to recognize the reality on the day of, he was promoted. Many people are asking that same question. And I started saying this line because when we were during our reserve duty in the Nitzrim corridor, the Secretary of Defense, the Chief of Staff, the Commander of Southern Command, and some other officer, I don't remember who he is or what he is, they all came to visit one after the other to see the corridor. And being in the position that I'm in, we constantly have to be near them or with them or it's involved in it. And as they were coming, I started saying, the higher an officer's rank get, the lower my respect for them goes. It was like an inverse relationship. The rank goes up, my respect goes down. And it was something that normally I wouldn't say. I do respect rank. I think people work extraordinarily hard to achieve it. It's not easy being in the army for that many years of your life. You sacrifice a lot on a personal level to achieve it. And I used to respect people as an idea. You achieve something, you've been there long enough, you have this rank. You have a basic level of respect for them until proven otherwise. And I think my foundation of respect has basically been the opposite. your army rank is no longer proof that you're deserving of respect. It's proof that the opposite.
There's a couple of things I want to say about that. The first is going back to what you said about the soldiers and the people. The IDF did not save Israel on the 7th of October. The IDF failed. The leadership and the military leadership of this country failed in a huge way. The soldiers of this country, the reservists who were called up instantaneously, like you, me, and our friends who pitched up within minutes or hours and were ready to fight. The Sadirnikim, the regular soldiers who, in some cases, literally picked up a rifle and ran down south. They're the ones who saved the country. The IDF command structure collapsed. The Air Force didn't know what they were doing. It was a complete collapse, and it was the soldiers that saved the country. And unfortunately, it was the generals who took the credit.
The generals took the credit, and then they squandered all of the momentum and all of the success that we had.
Absolutely.
But before we move on, there was one other point you made that I wanted to relate to, where you said that our situation today is the same as it was on October 6th.
Yeah, I still feel like that.
So I want to, it's not a matter of arguing with you. I think it's just a matter of a little bit more of perspective. I think politically, you're right. I won't argue. I think militarily, looking at it purely from the numbers on the ground, Hezbollah as a fighting force is basically decimated. They have no command structure left whatsoever. Their ability to wage war or present a significant threat in the near future, I'm not talking about in a year or two from now, for the next 6 months to a year, is basically non-existent. They cannot launch an October 7th styled attack on Israel anymore. Okay, they don't have that capability. Iran was this big, horrible threat, this huge dragon hanging over our heads. Both their attacks were proven to be fairly easily defended against. We proved that we have a regional alliance, even with countries that we don't necessarily have diplomatic relations with. It was proven that they're more of a paper dragon. Now, they're not to be feared at all. Their threat, it's not so much the 10,000-pound gorilla in the room. It's more manageable. The Houthis, again, who were threatened and saber-rattling, they've been proven to be completely ineffectual and kind of useless. More of a headache and a nuisance than a real threat. And that leaves us with Hamas. Which has proven that it is extraordinarily capable of surviving pretty much anything. Their ability to launch rockets, while yes, as we've seen again, is already back, it's not what it was pre-October 7th, where they could have launched hundreds and thousands a day if they wanted to. But I think a reality on a security level in the South is that it broke the consensus of this understanding. It broke this bubble of a dream that Israel had, that it can live alongside them. Now, again, do I think our leadership has properly internalized that and recognized that the amount of military manpower we need on the southern border, as long as Hamas exists, is only going to increase as time goes by unless we completely decimate them? I don't think they've internalized that. I think we as a nation have internalized that, though. And I think that the threat that everyone chooses to ignore, which is the threat that you've been dealing with for your entire reserve duty, is the threat that exists from the Arabs of Yehuda v'Shomron. I want to say also the Arabs that live here in Israel, they're almost like an internal enemy that everyone chooses not to talk about. And multiple murderers that have been released in the current deal have been released into our capital, into Jerusalem. And I'm not really sure how that's a thing that we're allowing to happen. But I think that the threat from Yehuda v'Shomron, if it was on a medium simmer at the beginning of the war, is now on a high boil. Because not only has the population of Yehuda v'Shomron seen what happens when they take initiative in their own hands, like Hamas did on October 7th in Gaza, they win. Yes, they bring property destruction to no end. Yes, there are people that are killed, but for them, they murdered over 1,500 Israelis in one day. They continued to murder Israelis in Gaza to the very end, and they paid no actual price. They paid no price in territory. They know that Qatar, Dubai, the Emirates will all come in and fund the reconstruction, and in 5 years from now, everything will be rebuilt, bigger and better than it was beforehand. And they have everything to gain. And that threat just got much bigger.
I have a lot to say about Yehuda and Shomron as well. But yes, that means with everything that was done, all the sacrifices that were made, In Gaza, we're back to October 6th. I'm sorry to say that. We're back to October 6th. That means at any minute we can face another attack. And it's only a matter of time before we drop our guard again. And it's not going to be, this time it'll be different. The idea of this time it'll be different has been the political outlook for 20 years. This time it'll be different. But Hamas is going to be doing something different. Hamas of 2009 was not Hamas of 2014, is not Hamas of 2023. They're going to be different again. We're doing the same thing, and that's why I'm really disappointed. We're back to the same situation. We learned nothing. We sacrificed a whole lot of brilliant people. We have thousands of soldiers that are injured. We have hundreds of people who are killed, so that we could go back to the same situation and say it's different. That is not winning. And I'm going to tie it into what you said in Yehuda and Shomron. When I got back to the Shomron 90 days ago, there was a very different atmosphere. That yes, within the cities, not only within the cities, within certain areas of Jenin and Nablus, there was a lot of terrorist activity, but it wasn't necessarily well organized. And the reason for that is the following. For generations, Palestinian Arabs have had this idea that long term, they will win. We as Israeli Jews don't have the stomach to go out and do what needs to be done. Nablus is a massive city. Jenin is a huge city. Ramallah is a huge city. We as Israelis don't have the ability or the desire to cause massive death and destruction in these cities. The Arabs know this, and as long as they keep it up and keep building and keep going, they will win because we will eventually capitulate. But with the pictures and the stories and the videos coming out from Gaza, Khan Yunis is destroyed. Jabalia was decimated. Rafiah didn't exist. The Arabs were looking at these pictures, looking at the death and destruction caused by the IDF, and they were aghast. Wow. Maybe those Jews do have the stomach to destroy us, to kill us, to do what needs to be done to win a war. And slowly, the mass population of Palestinian Arabs were realizing the Jews actually might win long term. And as that realization was coming to them, the Israeli military echelon capitulated and said, yeah, you know what? We don't have the stomach for it at the end of the day anyway.
Yeah. So, like I said at the beginning, I think I agree with you on the philosophical, political level. I think that the reality on the ground from an operational level, I'll disagree with you on. I think that the mid-level and the lower-level leadership of the army, who are the ones that actually make decisions on the ground, I do think that they've had their eyes open a little bit and recognize that the ranks and layers of command and control above them don't necessarily know what's going on, and that situations arise where they have to take matters into their own hands, which some of them did on October 7th, but not enough of them. I think short term, because I think we like to forget very quickly. We as the Israeli Jewish people like to forget our history very quickly. It'll last for a year or two, and then we'll go back to what we were 2 years ago.
But that is exactly the problem, because
Unless, there's one big...
The short term is what led us here.
Right, so I have one very big caveat. If we replace our leadership with people who have a real vision, who have a proven track record of not being stuck in this exiled mentality, who don't capitulate to the intersectional victimhood games, and who actually believe in winning, both politically, militaristically, economically, we can do all of that fairly easily. We just have to decide to do it and put people in the positions of leadership who can and want to do that.
Well, I hope you have faith in people, because I'm looking around and I see 120 Chavrei Knesset, and there is zero faith in me in any of them. And it could be from Meretz to Labour to Likud to Ben Gvir to the Arab parties. As far as I'm concerned, get rid of every single one of them. And the entire echelon of the IDF, the entire general staff. In fact, the only thing I'm slightly happy about within the Israeli military, the IDF, is the fact that the new chief of staff has come from outside. Kind of. And I compare it to when Gabi Ashkenazi took over in 2006. He had also left the army and he had to rehabilitate the army. And I hope that the incoming chief of staff, Zamir, can do that same thing, because there is a crisis of leadership in the army where soldiers on the ground, you and me and other soldiers, exactly like you said, we have faith in our comrades in arms. We have faith in our teams. We have faith in our sergeants. We have faith in our lieutenants and our direct commanding officers. We will do everything and anything that is needed. We'll prevail. We will destroy our enemies. But as we get higher up the chain of command, there is less connection and less faith and less ability to connect. And that crisis of command needs to be redressed. Exactly like you said previously, that the higher echelons, they command no respect from the soldiers. Guys like you and me have been in the trenches doing things that we would prefer not to boast about always. But that is our job. We eat bad stuff and we do terrible things. And, my parents listen to this. I have to watch my language. But we do this stuff as soldiers because it is our job. We do it for our friends. We do it for our country. We do it for our people. We do it for ourselves.
Well, I agree with your analysis and your conclusion. I think that you just touched on a very important point. And this isn't even we decided the subject for this podcast. We were going to talk about the deal with Hamas, and we're talking about the much bigger picture and all. And that's totally great for a first episode of the season to just open up the entire can of worms. And then we can delve into each one separately in the future. But you touched on that as a society, that at the lower levels of the command in the army, we're willing to do and put ourselves in situations that are personally unpleasant, uncomfortable, and detrimental to our own personal well-being because of the team we're on or the entire unit we're serving with, and because we value the cloud. Greater is more important than my own personal interest at the moment, yes, which is the number one motivating factor for anyone who does reserve duty, and is also the thing that unites all reservists together, irregardless of their political opinions or ideas or beliefs, is that they all believe, and we're all there because we believe that the general good is way more important than my own personal interests.
Sure.
Okay. And then as we go up the chain of command, I think that set of ideals changes. I think that at a certain level of command, there becomes this internal IDF politics almost, where you have to put your own personal interests ahead of the good, which is the exact wrong set of interests for people in those positions. I also think that politics is that way as well. And it's very rare that you're going to be able to get people that have a different incentive structure where they can still put their own personal interests aside to constantly be working for the greater good of what's good for the nation of Israel at the time. I don't think that our leadership is currently able to see past themselves. I don't think that I think it's been that way for a long time, and I think it's across the board. I agree with you. All 120 members of Knesset need to be replaced. I think everyone from lower ranks than necessary general, maybe one step lower, but whatever comes below general, lieutenant general, or brigadier general, or whatever, whatever it is, whatever the rank below generals, I think all of them, like, we have to, like with cancer, you cut out a little bit of the good with the bad to get rid of the tumor. I think we just have to clean house completely, remove all of them, and yeah, we'll lose one or two good people along the way, but we have to just replace it. There needs to be a moral statement that says, okay, you all failed. Some of you failed way worse. Some of you, Northern Command didn't fail nearly as badly as a Southern commander, right? That's just reality, but that's not necessarily because of anything he did differently. It's more because Hezbollah decided not to attack, right? But in the end of the day, his failure is still smaller. But he still has to go and be replaced. And again, like I said, hopefully Am Yisrael will be smart enough that in the next election to replace them with people. I'm working on that as well. And I'm more optimistic for the future, I think, than you are. And I think that as a nation of Israel, we're moving in the right direction. I think a lot of people had a lot of bubbles burst over the last year and a half. And I'm more optimistic for where we're moving as a nation, as a people. And yeah.
I mean, we speak about ending on a positive, so this is where it is. I will tell you from my perspective, I was generally a far more positive person before the 7th of October. And I had a personal crisis of faith, if you want to call it, on the 7th of October. And I haven't been able to reconcile with that. I have the most incredible unit in the Army. The guys I serve with are amazing. The area I serve, we know it, and we've done good work. The people I work with when I'm in civilian life at NGO1, they're amazing people. Okay, well, so your wife is one of them. You're great. My family, I can't ask for anything better. My friends, the people, the day-to-day happening that goes on in this country, from the bus drivers to the people in the Makolet, it's incredible. We have been betrayed by our leadership, and I cannot reconcile that yet. I am so disappointed. Our leadership is unworthy of the great people of this country.
So I'll say two things. One, I think you watch too much of the news.
I've actually stopped watching the news because of this. I used to watch the news almost religiously. I don't listen to the news anymore.
So that's a good thing. So as someone who also, I think before this war, I would have considered myself a very optimistic person. You know, I had my criticisms on what could be done differently and what we should do differently. But I would definitely have considered myself a very optimistic person. I think I had a bit of a crisis of optimism as well, where I just thought everything was dark and gloomy and we're never coming out of this. And I think I'm now even more optimistic than I ever was beforehand. And one thing, I stopped watching the news and started interacting solely with the people around me. So either I surround myself with very optimistic, wonderful, great people, yourself included, or I'm able to see past all the doom and gloom. You know, many times we've been told this is the end of the state of Israel. 2006, the Second Lebanon War, there was doomsday. There's what we call Neve Zam. Prophecies of doom are always around us. They make great headlines. They get good press. They're wonderful. They're terrible for the stock market. And they're terrible for your mental health. But they make great headlines and great press, so that's what's out there. But the reality is we're not there. The nation of Israel is strong. The Jewish people are strong. Our leadership sucks. That's great. The beauty is we live in a democracy. And whether they call an early election or the election will be in October 2026, the latest possible time for an election, we'll have it earlier. We can replace all of it. And it's just another thing to invest time in, is making sure that we have people who fit the model that we're looking for, who are worthy to lead this nation, get them elected. And I think that, and on a separate note, I think the good and the amazing things that have happened since the beginning of this war far outweigh the negatives and the harm that's been happening. I think the level of unity that we've seen both internally here and from the global Jewish world and the supporters who are non-Jewish has been extraordinary. I don't think it's the same level now as it was at the beginning of the war, but it's definitely still there. I think that there's a level, as soldiers, we'll talk about just practically within the Army, the level of efficiency of coming in and out of reserve duty. It's gone from being a total nightmare to extraordinarily efficient and well run. Yeah. We've had lots of, even though we thought we practiced a lot beforehand, this war has given us the opportunity to practice way more. I think the level of professionalism of our Army has only increased. And I think that the reality is a lot of those bubbles of belief systems that were flawed and failed were burst. And it's very hard to argue for them still. People are still making the arguments for them today. People are still arguing that dealing with the devil is a good thing and that good things can come of it. I think they're wrong and they're flawed, and time will, I'm pretty sure, will prove me right, unfortunately. But that's the reality we live in. And it's a good thing. Let those realities be shattered a little bit and see that as a positive and not as a negative.
What you said is very much does ring true. The fact that Israel and the Jewish world has undergone a major change. Despite the horrors of October 7th, the change that the country and the Jewish world has undergone is phenomenal. Even to the point where it's become very clear who's on our side and who is not. And the unity, the care, all of that has been amazing to see and is very, very important. We've used the tragedies of October 7th as a country, as a people, to move us forward. But we keep getting bogged down by the fact that our leadership hasn't moved forward.
So I think to cap today's episode, because we've gone a little bit all over the place, we just opened up the Pandora's box of ideas of stuff that we've been thinking about for 4 months.
I just want to let everyone know, we had originally planned to speak more specifically about the hostage deal and all of that, but that went out the window.
And the beauty is we have an entire season ahead of us to record as many episodes as we want. Hopefully we'll put out one a week, and we'll cover everything as in-depth as we can get. And this episode really just opened up the entire box of what I think we're going to be talking about for the next couple of months. But we always have a thing of ending on a positive note. I want to end on an inspirational note this week. Albert Einstein once said, in the midst of every crisis, greatest opportunity. And I think that this war is a proof of that statement, is that this war basically gave us the ability to hit Control-Alt-Delete, for those of us from our generation that still have to remember how to reboot a computer, to reset everything, reset the entire conversation internally within the nation of Israel, reset the balance of power within the nation of Israel. It gave us the ability to reset our relationships with every country and group of people abroad. It's giving us the opportunity. Again, we don't have an election yet, but we will have an election. And the upcoming election, whenever it may be in the next year and however long, is going to be an opportunity to reset the entire incentive structure for our political leadership, who can then affect the leadership within the bureaucracy, the leadership within the military. And everyone in the whole country realizes we need to make foundational, significant changes internally. And those changes have to be external as well towards the people we have relationships with. So we have a great opportunity. We have enormous potential. And I think that we're a little bit sidetracked at the moment, but we're on the right track to actually taking out great victory from the crisis that started on October 7th.
Well, I think that's a great way to end. We had planned a different episode and we went in a different direction. So please like, share, subscribe, and leave us comments if you want to hear what we're going to speak about in future episodes. We hope to stick around for at least another season with lots of new information, and we look forward to hearing from all of you.